Thank you. Good evening. I admired all these stories. They were so lighthearted and so entertaining and so fun-filled. I feel somewhat guilty stepping on that happiness Jeep and making a 180 turn right around. My stories will not be so frivolous or lighthearted and may not make anyone particularly laugh. My story basically deals with my dad and the context of, well, what does your father have to do with education days? My dad spent his entire life in the public school system. My dad started as a high school teacher in two very large South Jersey high schools, Edgewood and Overbrook. He became a head manager, a department head manager, and then became a vice principal over the course of several years. Now, as a small boy, I guess I was around 12 or 13, I was a little concerned about my dad's career because he had gone from teacher to department manager to vice principal, then kind of flattened out. Dad, what's going on? Dad, don't you want to be a principal? Everyone wants to be a principal. 13-year-old boy, I had this conversation with my dad. And my dad said to me, the concerns of a principal are not ones that I particularly share. He said, principals worry about buildings and teachers fighting and salaries and budgets. I don't care anything about that. I only care about the kids. I only care about the students. I pushed it just a little bit. I said, come on, Dad. What, are you getting a little lazy? You're losing the eye of the tiger here? I'm a 13-year-old boy. I'm very rank-driven. And my dad turned to me, and my dad had advanced degrees in history and English. He's a very, very, very educated man. And my dad said to me, he goes, do you know why the first principal was ever hired? I have no idea, Dad. The first principal was hired basically so he could get to the school early to chop the wood to start the stove to get the classes warmed up. That was a metaphor from my dad about teaching and his relationship with his students. My father loved teaching. When he was a department manager, he would often go and tell me stories where he would proctor teachers. And he would always tell me new teachers always seem to make two fatal assumptions. They always overestimate the knowledge of the student, and they underestimate the intelligence of the student. My father would work very hard at night writing these elaborate school plans, policy plans. He'd spend hours doing it, putting every ounce of brain power he has in it. And I would pass by from the kitchen and say, hey, Dad, how's it going in there? What's going on? And my dad would turn to me and he would say, you see this school policy I wrote? I said, yeah. He goes, I give it maybe 2 days before the average senior in my high school will find more contradictions, more fallacies, more gaps in this that you can drive a school bus through. I went to high school in the 70s. And I don't know if you remember my age, but during the 70s, they lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. So I took it upon myself and my best friend Bob that we were now empowered sovereign citizens. We no longer need parental authority. So we signed ourselves out for the day at the guidance department. And ostensibly we went to go car shopping for me, even though I had like maybe 2 pennies to my name. But what promoted it was my dad saying in passing that maybe for this summer he'll get Tommy a car so he can drive to work. So we went car shopping, and of course the school sent my parents a letter that I had signed myself out. And my dad comes to me, he says, can you explain this letter? I told him my flawed thinking. And he said to me, well, you are following in the advice of Mark Twain. I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, Dad, what advice is that? He said, Mark Twain wrote, as a child, I refused to let school stand in the way of my education. I said, thanks, Dad. When I was in college, my dad would check in with me routinely. I went locally. And one day my dad called and asked me how was classes. And I said, Dad, you're not going to believe it. My economics professor canceled a 3-hour seminar on the consumption function of the Punjab region in India. And I said, what me and the aforementioned Bob did, we kind of went to the school pub and drank beer, and played foosball. And my dad said something to me that I'm surprised no one has ever written down. He said, "Isn't it amazing that education is the only commodity in which the consumer purchases and then when it gets shortchanged, has a celebration?" This last story, as I close, is a little touching, very personal story. I'm not 100% comfortable even sharing it. It's very private. My dad passed away. And I always had this childish fantasy, very childish fantasy. You all can laugh at me for this. That when my father was welcomed in the pearly gates, St. Peter said, "Robert, come on in, let's go, come on in. Heaven's getting filled." St. Thomas Aquinas, patron saint of formal education. St. Thomas Aquinas says he was waiting for you. And I had hoped my dad would be led to celestial schoolroom. And my dad would open it and he'd see all these people of different races and nationalities and genders. And I would hope my dad would bring out his favorite history book, would open up and read, "We hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed with a creator by certain inalienable rights." He would close the book and he'd say, "Now, I know many of you here don't even understand a word of that, but I promise you, when you're done this course, you'll understand it completely. Thank you."